Is this some kind of joke? The guard's voice, sharp and laced with disdain, cut through the solemn morning air. He stood with his arms crossed, a human barricade in a crisp dress uniform, blocking the grand entrance to Arlington National Cemetery. His partner, a man of similar youth and arrogance, smirked beside him. Before them stood Robert Mitchell. At 87, his frame was stooped, his hands weathered by time, and his face a road map of a life lived long and hard. He wore a simple dark suit, frayed at the cuffs, but impeccably clean. It was the only one he owned. He didn't flinch at the guard's question. His gaze, clear and steady, remained fixed on the green hills beyond the gate, where the flags flew at half-mast. He said nothing, his silence a stark contrast to the guard's aggressive posture. The younger guard stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. "Sir, this is a private funeral for General Thompson. Invitation only. I need to see your credentials, or you need to leave." The confrontation hung in the air, a sour note in a place dedicated to honor. The guard was a wall of rules and regulations. Seeing only a confused old man who had wandered into the wrong place, he couldn't see the history standing before him. The living testament to the very values the cemetery was built to commemorate. The tension began to coil tight and dangerous as more cars, long black sedans with government plates, began to arrive, their occupants casting curious, pitying glances at the old man being held at the gate. Robert Mitchell simply waited. He had waited through worse. The younger guard, whose name tag read Henderson, sighed with theatrical impatience. "Look, Grandpa, I don't have time for this. The motorcade is arriving soon. You're creating a security issue." He gestured vaguely down the road toward the approaching dignified procession. "You need to move along and find whatever nursing home you wander away from." The insult was clear, wrapped in a thin veneer of formal address. A small crowd of mourners had started to gather at a respectful distance, their curiosity piqued by the standoff. They were a collection of high-ranking military officers, somber-faced politicians, and grieving family members, all dressed in formal black. Their whispers were a low hum beneath the guard's sharp tones. Robert could feel their eyes on him, a mixture of pity, annoyance, and embarrassment. It was a familiar feeling. He had spent a lifetime being underestimated, being invisible. It was for the most part a role he preferred. But not today, not here. "My name is Robert Mitchell," he said, his voice even. "Just tell them Robert Mitchell is here." Henderson took a step closer, his personal space violation deliberate and intimidating. "Robert Mitchell. Okay. And I'm the Secretary of Defense. Names don't mean anything without the right paperwork. Old Timur." He pointed a gloved finger at Robert's chest. "This is a state funeral with the highest level of security. You can't just walk up here claiming to know the deceased without proper invitation." The insult was clear, wrapped in a thin veneer of formal address. A lieutenant approached the checkpoint, drawn by the commotion. "What's the holdup, Corporal?" "This man, sir," Davis said, gesturing toward Robert, "refuses to leave, claims he's a friend of General Thompson. No invitation, no credentials." The lieutenant looked Robert up and down, his gaze lingering on the worn fabric of his suit and the scuffed toes of his shoes. His assessment was swift and dismissive. "Sir, you're disrupting a state funeral. I am giving you one final order to vacate the premises immediately." The lieutenant's tone was one he had practiced in a mirror, an attempt to project authority he had not yet earned. Robert's patience, a reservoir deep and vast, was finally beginning to run dry. "I'm not leaving," he said. The words simple, absolute. The lieutenant's face hardened. "Then you're under arrest for trespassing and interfering with a military ceremony." He nodded to the guards. "Escort him out. If he resists, cuff him." As Henderson and Davis moved toward Robert, their hands reaching for restraints, the distant rumble of an approaching convoy grew louder. Black vehicles with tinted windows began to slow near the entrance. The lieutenant glanced nervously at his watch, realizing the timing of this confrontation couldn't be worse. Behind the cemetery gates, a radio crackled to life in the security command tent. Colonel Brennan, the ceremony coordinator, was monitoring multiple channels when an urgent transmission cut through the routine chatter. "Sir, we have a situation at the main gate." An elderly civilian claims to know General Thompson personally. He's refusing to leave, and the guards are about to arrest him. Brennan frowned, reaching for his binoculars to observe the scene unfolding at the entrance. Through the lenses, he could see the old man standing perfectly still, dignity intact despite the chaos around him. Something about the man's bearing, his quiet resolve, struck Brennan as familiar. He had seen that kind of composure before in veterans who had faced far worse than bureaucratic humiliation. "Get him on the radio. Get him off the reviewing stand. I don't care. Do it now." He began pacing the confines of the tent like a caged tiger. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Robert Mitchell. After all these years, General Thompson had spent the last decade of his life trying to find him to thank him one last time. He had left explicit instructions in his final letter. A letter Brennan now held in his desk. "If a man named Robert Mitchell ever comes looking for me," it read, "give him whatever he asks. He is owed a debt that this nation can never repay." The major was back holding a radio handset. "I have General Adams, sir." Brennan snatched the radio. "General, this is Brennan. We have a code shepherd at the main gate. I repeat, code shepherd is active." The radio crackled. The voice of the highest-ranking active duty officer in attendance, a four-star general named Michael Adams, came through, stripped of all ceremony. "Say again, Colonel Shepard, that's not possible." "It's him, sir." The radio went silent for a long moment. Then General Adams' voice returned, heavy with emotion and urgency. "Do not let that man be harmed or humiliated further. I'm coming personally." Meanwhile, at the gate, the lieutenant had grown impatient with the delay. The approaching motorcade was now visible, a line of official vehicles moving steadily toward the cemetery entrance. His career depended on this ceremony proceeding smoothly, and an elderly vagrant was threatening to derail everything. "Move him now," he ordered Henderson and Davis. "I don't care if you have to drag him. Just get him away from the gates before the VIPs arrive." As the guards reached for Robert's arms, he didn't resist. His weathered hands remained at his sides, his expression calm. He had faced far worse than two young men drunk on their own authority. But in his eyes, something flickered, a memory of another time, another place, when standing his ground had meant the difference between life and death for men who depended on him. The black sedan screeched to a halt at the cemetery entrance, its tires kicking up gravel and dust. The door flew open before the vehicle had fully stopped, and out stepped General Michael Adams. His 4 stars gleamed in the morning sun, his uniform immaculate, his bearing commanding absolute attention. The effect was immediate and electric. Every person within sight straightened, conversations died, and even the birds seemed to quiet their songs. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, scanned the scene until they found what they were looking for. They landed on the stooped figure of Robert Mitchell. The general's entire demeanor changed. The hard, commanding aura dissolved, replaced by something else entirely, a look of profound, almost reverent respect. He began to walk, his polished boots marking a slow, deliberate rhythm on the pavement. He walked past the terrified lieutenant, past the stunned guards, past everyone, his path leading to one man and one man only. He stopped precisely 3 feet in front of Robert Mitchell. In the dead silence, General Adams drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He raised his right hand to his brow, not in a casual gesture, but in the sharpest, most impeccably executed salute the lieutenant had ever witnessed. It was a salute of ultimate respect, a gesture of deference from a 4-star general to a civilian in a threadbare suit. His voice, when he spoke, carried across the cemetery grounds like a battle command. "Ladies and gentlemen, you stand in the presence of a living legend. This is Robert Mitchell. In Vietnam, they called him the Guardian. He wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense. He was a medic, a pilot, a navigator, and when he had to be, a warrior of unmatched ferocity. He never wore a rank. He never accepted a commission, and he refused every single medal offered to him. He said the only reward he needed was seeing his boys come home. The general took a step closer to Robert, his eyes shining with unshed tears. In the spring of 1968, a helicopter carrying a dozen Green Berets was shot down deep in enemy territory. One of the survivors was a young captain named David Thompson. For 3 days, they were surrounded, outnumbered 10-1, with no hope of extraction. But on the third night, a single man came for them. Through the jungle, through enemy patrols came the Guardian. He carried half of those men out on his own back. Robert Mitchell, right here. He is the reason David Thompson lived to become the great man we honor today. The general finally lowered his salute, but his eyes never left Robert's. He gently pointed to the tarnished pin on Robert's lapel. "You see this piece of metal? This trinket you mistook for garbage?" he said, his voice now a low growl directed at the lieutenant. "This is a piece of shrapnel from a mortar shell that landed 3 feet from Captain Thompson." Robert Mitchell threw himself on top of Thompson, taking the blast that would have killed him. David Thompson forged that piece of shrapnel into a pin himself, and he called it the Medal of Guardians. It is the only one ever made. It is the highest honor a man like him could ever bestow. The vindication was total and absolute. The crowd was no longer staring with pity, but with awe. The soldiers in attendance, from privates to colonels, began to slowly, one by one, raise their own hands in salute to the unassuming old man. General Adams personally escorted Robert Mitchell through the gates, past the rows of saluting soldiers and the stunned, silent crowd. He led him not to a seat in the back, but to the very front row, placing him among General Thompson's grieving family. They had heard the stories of the Guardian their whole lives, and they embraced the old man with tears in their eyes, thanking him for giving them 50 more years with their beloved patriarch. Robert sat through the service, a quiet, stoic figure, paying his final respects to his friend, his duty finally done. The fallout from the incident at the gate was swift and decisive. The lieutenant and his guards were not dishonorably discharged. Robert wouldn't have wanted that. Instead, General Adams personally oversaw their reassignment and mandatory retraining. They would learn how to recognize honor in all its forms, and more importantly, how to treat people. And you need to understand that sometimes the most important people, the ones who have sacrificed the most, wear no uniform at all. Just remember that. As Robert spoke those words, the memory of the pin's creation bloomed fully into view. A makeshift field hospital smelling of antiseptic and death. A young Robert Mitchell lay on a cot, his back a bloody tapestry of shrapnel wounds. Beside him sat Captain David Thompson, his own leg in a splint. In Thompson's hand was a jagged, ugly piece of metal pulled from Robert's own flesh just hours before. He pressed it into Robert's palm. "They're putting me in for a silver star for that mess," Thompson said, his voice thick with emotion. "But it belongs to you. All of it. I don't know what medal I can give you that the Army will recognize. But I want you to have this, so you never forget the price. So I never forget the debt."